Campbell. I'm the executive director and founder of Cognitive Academy Charter Public School, and I also have the privilege of serving on the Boston School Committee. I'm the only charter school person on a school committee in the country. Yes, really interesting. We're here today joined by some real experts, and I'm going to mostly let them talk. But as I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, I'm going to ask them, as they introduce themselves, to answer the question, really kind of going off of the speech that we just had a chance to hear, which is that, you know, what it needs to be different, and obviously it needs to be focused on closing the achievement gap. And so I'd like to ask each of them to just, in their experience, what do they think in the last, 3 to 5 years? What's the technology that's been adopted and implemented widely that has, in fact, helped close the achievement gap? And they'll introduce themselves as they go online.
Hi, I'm Deb Sosha, and I'm a 34-year educator. And I was a math and science teacher, and then I became a principal, and I ran a school in Boston that was a one-to-one laptop school, and it was in the Grove Hall section of Dorchester, if you know Boston at all. It's an interesting neighborhood with wonderful folks. And one of the issues in the neighborhood was that the kids couldn't take the technology home, and as principal, that was upsetting to me. They couldn't take it home because they would be a target for other kids to jump to steal their laptop. So we had to make sure we found a way that they could have technology at home too. So we took a program that already existed called Tech Goes Home in Boston, which provided refurbished computers to folks and some training. And we changed it into a different kind of program, and we made sure all of our kids got a brand new network computer that they could have at home. So they had technology at school and technology at home. Still left the internet, which we're working on. But the program now, the program that we ran at my school is now running across the entire city in 130 locations, some schools, some community centers, some libraries. And so trying to scale up to a lot of schools in a public school district is something I know about. And when Meg asked about what are the biggest barriers, I have to say, if you know Debbie Meyer, wonderful educator, she said, do we have the will to educate all children? And I think that's the question. Do we have the will? Because when you have the will, you find the money, you find the time, you find the way. And so it's about developing that will. I think the home access is another issue that we really have to deal with. And I work a lot with Comcast around the Internet Essentials program, Connect and Compete across the country. These are programs that are trying to get low-cost access to children. I think it's a bigger barrier than some of the other issues. You may have seen this week the article in the Wall Street Journal, Homework with a Side of Fries, about children in poor communities that go to McDonald's with their computers so they can get online. Getting that home access, I think, is important, and I think we need ubiquity, and we need to make it easy to get there. And part of that, I think, is training families about why it's important, how it can save you money. And that's part of what I do.
Can you just so what do you think is the technological advancement that is most close to achieving the gap?
I think I think just getting the access. I mean, that's where the gap has been so significant. To me, it's never really been about a gap in achievement. It's been about a gap in resource. If the opportunity isn't there, so if you take two children, one has an essay to write for AP English, goes home and has everything she needs at home. And then you take another child who goes to the library, stands in line, gets there half hour, has to get back up, go back to the end of the line, put it on a thumb drive, get to school early and print it out. You can't look at those two papers and expect the exact same outcome. In the same way you wouldn't expect a Jaguar and a Volkswagen Beetle to have the same rev when you step on the gas. You're just not going to get the same outcome if you don't have the same input.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Craig Powell. I'm the founder and CEO of ConnectEDU. ConnectEDU is an organization headquartered here in Boston, focused on connecting learners to possibilities by rationalizing learning and career plans. So we service about 22 million students across K-12 post-secondary and into the workforce. Work with about 4,000 K-12 organizations, about 1,000 post-secondary organizations. And then we have 130,000 employers that interact across our platform as well, posting on average around 2 to 2.5 million entry-level jobs and internships with the goal of helping students contextualize and understand why math matters or how fractions might get used at a place like Boeing. So that's the type of work we do, primarily in the U.S., but also across 40 countries. Relative to closing the achievement gap, I guess my question would be, is it closing? I think that might be an ambitious statement if we take a long view from the learner's perspective, which at least in Connected U's world, completion of K-12 is not the goal. It's completion of K-12 with entry into post-secondary education with arrival at a job. And some sort of ability to make a productive contribution. I would speak, I guess, more places where I think they are closing that gap more successfully than we are in the U.S. or really in the international markets, where they've always viewed their people as their primary capital source, or what we would call human capital, and therefore they invest in it accordingly. They align outcomes to local economies and what sustain local economies. They contextualize using data decisions and course plans and how those courses map to the skills that you need to achieve in order to be successful in a particular field of study. That's all enabled really around a fundamental view of technology, which is the creation of a data system, and a data system that has the ability to move at high velocity. And that's something that we struggle with immensely in the U.S., in large part not because of technology, but because of politics and school boards and decentralization of decision making. But the systems and the solutions from a technological perspective that are needed to connect this are actually quite simple and have existed in most other markets for quite some time. So I look abroad relative to places where we see examples of folks that are really moving towards alignment of achieving, closing that gap and alignment of education, career, and financial decision making for learners.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melissa Dodd, and I'm the Chief Information Officer for Boston Public Schools. So I have the job of managing all of the technology for 128 schools. We have about 57,000 students and nearly 5,000 teachers. To think about the one technology that makes a difference, I'll actually connect to a couple of things that both Deb and Craig have said, and a little bit of what Seth said earlier at the end of his talk, which is the kind of it depends. And it's really about, I can't say that there's one technology, but it is how it's being used. And I think that's what makes the biggest difference. So the technology, in my mind, isn't going to replace the teacher, but really make that teacher even stronger and more effective in what they're doing, and really help the teaching and learning experience of what's happening in the classroom. So it really depends on how it's being used, and that goes to how teachers are prepared, how it's woven seamlessly into the curriculum, so it's not the extra thing that's done with students. So, it's really thinking about that holistic picture of what that classroom and what that learning experience is like for the student. So, one of the things that I do in working with schools, my job is to think about how you bring technology to scale. How do we enable access for all of our students in all of our schools? And that is sort of one of those foundational tools in every classroom, and a tool that teachers and students have in their toolkit to help them do what they need to do. With that in mind, it is thinking about what's the right fit, what's the need, what are the learning needs, and then what's the right tool or set of tools that can help the student. So a lot of what I do in Boston is really think about, for a particular classroom or for a particular student or a particular school, what's the technology that makes the most sense for them. And that varies across all of our schools.
Well, each of you kind of put a spotlight on the human dimension of whether it's the lack of will, Deb noted, or the political barriers that is running into, or just the nuance of how to use it. And I guess I'm wondering, in where you sit, how do you you've got the people barrier. It sounds like actually the significant barrier is not the technology, it's the people. And I just wonder, in your view, how much of that is the problem, as opposed to we just don't have enough money? Because I think the easy answer is, well, there's just not enough money for this. And is kind of where are you on the money side?
I wish I had some. But I think it's an interesting dilemma, because the money follows the will in some ways, but it's also about public support. And if there were a public outcry saying, we really need to have technology in our schools, we need to support teachers and make sure they know how to use them well, it would happen. But that public outcry, that real push for that, I don't hear it in the way I wish we did. I do think there is, as Seth said earlier, this issue with lack of ability to be risk takers too. I think districts in general are not really great at taking big risks, and making a big change like providing technology across a district, that's a big commitment. Providing a piece of software across a district, again, a big cost, a big commitment, and it's pretty hard to ensure that it gets used well in every school when you're at the district level. And I think those are both big dilemmas in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think we have a money problem. I think we'd be better off with fewer dollars. I think we have an efficiency in the way we think and approach problem solving, where money is actually part of the problem. In post-secondary, as an example, the fastest way to get fired is to not do what you did last year. You can totally blow your admissions numbers, but just do what you did last year, and you'll be okay. But if you tried something new, or you did something innovative, or instead of storing social security numbers, names, addresses, and things in manila folders, and you moved to a digital platform, that would also save you money. There's no impetus to make that change. And we've seen that in our business. Our business has grown dramatically since 2008, in large part because budgets have been cut. And when budgets are cut, it forces folks to get more efficient and use technology, not for technology's sake, but to make it ubiquitous with the learning process. One example of that, we ended up producing tablets in our space because one of our biggest issues in K-12 is that only 80% of the schools in this country have the infrastructure that we need in order to run the types of solutions that we try to bring to the market. So I always tell the Baltimore City School example, and you must deal with this every day. When we came in, they were running Internet Explorer 4 on 60,000 desktops with an IT support staff of 10. And most of the backgrounds of the IT support staff, it was copy repair, veterans or retirees for the most part, because that's what, when the copy machine busted, that was what brought the school to a halt. In the business world, you solve that problem by outsourcing desktop management to a company that our company just went through upgrade to Microsoft Office 8. 180 employees, done in about 25 minutes across several thousand units by a marginal or to moderate tech background. When you have fewer dollars, it forces you to get a little more creative and a little more thoughtful. But we don't have a money problem. We should actually be asking, how do we drive better outcomes with shorter dollars? I think we'd make better decisions.
So I'll give you that. I think the money could be reallocated or the way that we invest it. But I can't necessarily say that we have that money isn't a problem. I'll still take it. When you look at Seth gave some of the figures. When you look at across sectors in terms of what's spent on education versus other sectors, we're like such a small piece. And just my little soapbox, if education is our, one of our number one national priorities, I think we should be spending, in general, more money on it. But I do think, it is about, how we're then using those dollars and how we're tying it into what's happening, that the technology isn't on the periphery, that it's part and parcel of the core of K-12 education. That's the shift that I think needs to take place and is, it is happening. So, I think that the money side is one piece of it, but then it's also what's all of the support infrastructure around it as well, because you want to make something that's sustainable. I'll just use an example from Boston. A number of years ago, we saw that the technology proficiency of our teachers, if we wanted our students to be using technology, we needed to get our teachers to a certain level. We needed to make sure that they had access to the tools because they were the gatekeepers, essentially, for our teachers. So we put a plan together that would provide every one of our teachers with technology for their classroom, with a laptop. And that was a huge, big risk. At that time, this was 2007. We were coming up, it seems like a lifetime ago, but you looked at urban districts, and there were very few urban districts that were doing this. That they were it wasn't just that you got technology, you earned it through some type of PD, or if schools had extra funds, that this became, this is a tool that our teachers have. I think that was a very big risk to take at the time. Now it's kind of like, teachers wouldn't have a laptop. So, part of it, I think, is also having a real clear plan and purpose, not just to bring the technology in, but then also how is it going to, supporting teachers through the process in terms of how they're going to use it.
We're going to talk just a little bit more, and then we'll open it up to your great questions. One moment here, Craig, sorry. Really interesting idea about outsourcing. You kind of suggesting, I guess, not to put words in your mouth, that maybe the district doesn't have the capacity to keep up to date with the rapid technological advances. Would you just talk a little bit more about where you see schools or districts outsourcing? That's a really interesting idea in terms of a strategy for overcoming a barrier, which is the human resource barrier.
Yeah, and it's, and I'd take the money too. I would, but I'd invest it differently. We'll just see more scholarship dollars in lowering costs of some of these dollars. But it's fascinating to me. We're a business that's focused in the education space. We run our business by focusing on doing our three core things really well. Everything else we outsource. And we do that because we studied a lot of really successful businesses. And we didn't pick three arbitrarily. We picked it because in the studies we read, really successful organizations do three things really, really well. And everything else they view as non-core. In the education space, we insource everything. If we don't control it, if we don't build it out, if it's not ours, if it's not our server farm, it's not our IT resource, even instruction. If it's not my AP calculus teacher, the vantage point has always been to insource everything. And that is unique to the education space by comparison to many of the other industries that receive the level of investment that they do. There's a correlation there because those dollars go a long ways. They're exercised, which creates return, which is what brings more dollars into those markets. I think the good news is that we're seeing that trend and technologies enabling this as well. I know in the state of Texas, as an example, we have 350,000 teachers that instead of going to Arlington twice a year for professional development, are logged in on a daily basis, collaborating across curriculum, sharing curriculum, creating lesson plans, teaching, taking their teacher certifications. I think, back to the dollars being reinvested when we showed up in the state of Texas, I think they were spending $22 million a year getting those teachers into Arlington hotel rooms a couple times a year. I can tell you they spend a lot less than that with us to infuse teachers into threads and collaboration and doing professional development real time, 24/7. So I think it's just a mentality and a mindset. And I think the other thing to think about or keep in mind is that there are very few progressive CTOs like the one sitting next to me in this industry. And when you slice the 77,000 or 78,000 schools across the United States, there's only about 1,000 of them that are of any real critical mass in terms of size and scope. And that's really where you see the top-notch chief technology officers. As you skew down that, we see more converted math teachers turned directors of technology than we do anything that you would hire in a commercial environment to run a tech infrastructure. So if you're at a state budget level, why wouldn't you have a state education cloud? Why wouldn't you source capacity in a day and an age from a single point of destination? Why wouldn't you have the Uber Dropbox across your entire system? Those are all, and the answer is politics, right? It gets down to the fact that Lee really happens to be somebody's cousin that probably sits somewhere inside a school board. So, and those are, but I think one of the things in K-12 in the U.S. is to keep in mind just the stratification. It's not the folks that are showing up to these sorts of things that are where the masses of the market exist. It's not the folks that make up the national trade associations. Those are the luxury good folks. They're the ones that have capacity in their budget. The problems sit with the folks you never hear from. They're in Appalachia. They're typically in rural communities, not urban ones, which is always shocking to people. And so you've got a real disconnect in who informs some of this dialogue. They also don't come from political power bases. They come from some of the poorest congressional communities across the U.S. So, but I think in taking good business fundamentals and applying it to this process, this really isn't that mysterious. It doesn't have to be as mysterious as we make it, but a lot of politics involved in the U.S. And so, to answer your question, how do you survive that? You recognize that it's going to be an 18-month sales cycle, whether you sell something that's 10 grand or 100 grand. If you're a small business, I'd piggyback on somebody that's got an installed base. If you can avoid selling into K-12, I'd avoid it. If you can sell to the state, sell to the state. Or sell to the top 1,000, but if there are very fundamental reasons for why the educational system in the U.S., and particularly on the K-12 side, is not infused with the technology and the innovations that it needs, and it has very little to do with the technology.
Well, it's kind of bleak. Do you see the Common Core being an ally in driving more openness to using technology in innovative ways? Maybe somebody comment on that.
Sure. I think if we position it the right way, yes. I mean, there's the, looking at, you can look at the standards, and aside from the specific standards, look at the overall goal that I think the standards are identifying for students, the critical thinking skills, the the collaborative skills, the focus on writing, really being able to understand complex concepts. I think our job on the technology side is to identify that and link every place where technology can support that, because we're not necessarily at a point where it's we don't all think that way in the sense of, I've got I'm trying to help my students with argumentative writing. Let me think about how technology can help them with that. So there is that shift in mindset, and I think that's why a close collaboration, I speak from a district perspective, but a close collaboration with our curriculum friends is so critical, so that we're bridging the curriculum and the technology. I think, online assessments, that's, and I brought this up in my presentation to the school committee last spring. As we move to more online assessments, that is at least, it's an entry point because it shows that we've got to be thinking about the access, not that we haven't already, but the pervasive access, and not just of the device, but it's the whole package. It's the bandwidth. It's the support for it. And you can't then assume also that students can sit down and take an assessment online if they haven't been using that technology in their daily practice and their daily teaching and learning. So it kind of helps to bring, in my mind, it helps to bring kind of everything together to have that seamless experience for the students, so that when it is assessment time, they're ready for that, because that's what they're going to have in college. We've got to be preparing our students for that experience. Yeah.
I'm glad the Common Core is going to begin to change a bit the way we think about teaching and learning. Having been an educator for a really long time, I feel like the shift had gone way too far on filling in dots and not really critical thinking, and that was very concerning to me as a math and science person. So I think in a lot of ways it's going to change the way that schools think about teaching, which may open the door for more integration of technology in meaningful ways. On a more pragmatic side, because the Common Core is going to be tested on technology, it will infuse technology. It may not get used well right away, but it will at least be present, and we'll begin to see some of the innovative teachers taking advantage of that. As a principal, what I realized happens, first I went to a conference this week and somebody said, change happens at the speed of trust. I thought, what a good comment that is, right? So in a school, you can't walk to a group of teachers and say, okay, you're all going to infuse technology in your education. What you do is say, I'm really interested in doing this. Who'd like to join me? And we get started with a small group and it grows. And that, in my opinion, and Seth talked about that, in my opinion, that is how it happens. That's how change really happens. It's through collaborations and conversations and excitement, and it builds, and the kids see it over here, so now they want to do it over there, and it just builds and builds, and the school gets successful, so the neighboring school gets involved. And I think really, if you want to get deeply into a district and have a product used well, that's how it gets used well. And I, as an innovative person, I was always happy to have somebody new come to my school and say, we've got a new product, are you interested in trying it? And I'd always say, what kind of deal can I get? But I actually beta tested tons of products in our school, some of which are now on the market and quite successful. But it was a great way for us to get in on the ground floor and try out something new. And just see, did it fit? I will say one other thing about that Melissa mentioned, and that's about silos happening, and that does happen in districts. It's really hard if the IT department is not deeply entrenched and knowledgeable about what's going on in the academic side, and vice versa. Strange things can happen, right? So you buy a piece of software that doesn't work on the technology that's available in the district. You know, those kind of conversations have got to be broken. The silos have to be broken down for that to be successful.
Yeah, the tech has to drive the business of teaching. Just to respond to Common Core, I think it's probably the most interesting, pervasive change that's happened that we've since the kind of decade I've been in the space. I'll just give you some examples of things it allows you to do. We can now, I can take a STEM employer who's looking to drive STEM talent and showcase that on the left-hand pane around today's fraction lesson with a student who's told me that they're interested in a career in STEM. Or perhaps hasn't told me they're interested in a career in STEM, but I see that they're taking an advanced math curriculum and doing well. You can't do those things without a common core or coding system. So I think that sort of element is very exciting. The skeptic, which you've noticed I've become a healthy one in my time in the space, is that I really struggle that the political winds of the publishers are truly going to move towards what the Common Core should allow us to do, which is to evaluate the effectiveness of their content. And that's going to take some bold move by places in some states that have not adopted the Common Core, like a state of Texas, who spends $775 million a year on K-12 textbooks and can't tell you if they work or not. That's a problem. And so the skeptic in me says that these data and the ability to exit ticket and evaluate the effectiveness of content and do it by learning profiles and contextualize it back, there's a really big lobby that controls K-12 education in this country that's got a very vested interest in making sure that never happens.
Yeah, more iron lungs instead of a vaccine. Let's open up to the questions. Yes?
You say that, I mean, everything I'm hearing, I'm saying, yeah, go like this. And the biggest thing what Seth said earlier was you can't just throw a bunch of iPads at the teachers and say, hey, let's hope this works or sticks. The professional development / training part of this, to me, seems to be one of the biggest issues that is a barrier for any of us that go in and say, I'd like to bundle this with either technology that I'm selling, or I would like to sell this professional development training to help you get your teachers up to speed with the are there dollars funded for that, or is it just the technology itself?
Yes is the short answer. But I think you said a number of things in that statement, however, which is just good consumer technology doesn't make for good education technology.
Right.
Because it's the way we consume our music, which is one-dimensional, doesn't mean it's the way we're going to consume a textbook, take notes on that textbook, complete a quiz based off what I learned out of that textbook, and turn that paper back in based off what I learned out of that textbook. So before you invest in professional development, which is the issue, is the way I would phrase it.
Right.
Because you also have technology that makes sense and makes sense inside the learning environment. But I would just start there with, back to the comments earlier of making sure that the technology plan is driving the business effectiveness, not technology informing business. I think you're going to see a lot of districts that have a lot of dusty iPads here in a year or two. And what concerns me is that we'll give up on the hope of what those things actually could do inside a district if we were just a tiny bit more thoughtful before we assume that music consumption is and socialization is immediately applicable to the educational process.
And if I could just say something to that, the integration of technology into the curriculum seems to be what I see lacking. It's been the textbook basal approach, throw in a few ancillary products, either hardware or software, but it seems that that goes along with the how does the teacher integrate technology into their curriculum?
Thank you. I'd love to comment on that one, living my life there for quite a long time. A few things that I know really, truly about professional development. It almost never works when I bring people in that don't know my staff and aren't going to be there tomorrow. So what I did was I'd send my staff to you, one staff member, really powerful person, and say, teach them everything.
Train the train.
When they come back, they're the internal experts, so that if I forget what to do tomorrow, I know who to go to. And I did that with everything we implemented. The second thing is, it's not going to happen if you don't mandate it. Right? So we have a list of things. These are the things you must do. These are the things you could do. Should do. These are the things you could do. After a while, coulds became shoulds, and shoulds became musts, and the must list grew. Everybody had to move in that direction. And the other thing is, I always told folks, this is not in addition to what you already do. It is instead of what you're currently doing. And that you can't think of it as additional. It has to be part of. We did all of our professional development internally, and our entire staff was using technology very well. Not wonderfully well, but very well.
I would just add, I agree with Deb. I think that the time factor around professional development, when it is kind of disconnected, it's often seen, well, it's, the platform or the tool is intuitive enough, we can kind of do a one-time PD and folks are good to go. It has to be ongoing. There has to be, multiple times for teachers to be able to learn, practice, reflect. I mean, what we want for our students, right? And have that be a cyclical process. I think the other factor, and this is something, again, a program that we offer for our schools, is getting the school leader involved. So we do year-long professional development programs for cadres within a particular school. So also that one person in the school doesn't necessarily feel like they're an island unto themselves. So we get the school leader together with a couple of teachers and have them experience a shared experience around learning the technology, but more the focus being on how are they going to bring that back to their school. What do they want to see in their school culture? What are they going to say is the must, the should, the could, and kind of put that together. So I think also getting the school leader involved is critical for the school leader to have those aha moments. They don't have to be the most tech savviest person that you've got, but to be able to provide that space for their teachers or for even their students to get involved in it. That's a critical factor that we've seen as well.
Question?
Yeah. So I think Craig touched on the concept of taking risks and trying things, being innovative in the classroom. We're talking a lot about technology and how do we implement that, but there's also this whole stream of talk about how do we look at changing the way we teach, changing the classroom environment, and teaching 21st century skills. And by the way, we can use technology as tools to get that to happen. It seems almost like we need to focus more on what do we do in the classroom to change that and mix that up, and then what tools do we bring in. But we find that that's really a hard thing to get to happen because people are very confident with the way they've been doing things in the classroom and they don't want to change necessarily and take that risk. How do we handle that?
Some of it is just pure education as well. I mean, what's the number one unplaced job in the state of Massachusetts right now? Specialty welding. Starting salary, $80,000 a year. Need an associate's degree from a community college in order to get it. How many college counselors do you think in the state of Massachusetts can answer that question for you? How many community college instructors do you think can answer that question for you? And yet you've got, and by the way, it happens to be the number one misplaced job in the state of Louisiana as well, and Texas, and 6 other states. So part of this is just, you got to have a data layer that connects these things, not into a state longitudinal data system so that once a year we can document all the problems we have and obsess over it, but in a system that updates at high velocity on a routine basis so that when I'm logging into today's math lesson, I understand how today's math lesson ties back to the economic objectives and alternatives that exist for me. And our experience has been that when you educate, these are educators, when you educate them and you let them know and you connect these things, they're very creative folks, and they will run rapidly towards those solutions. I'd say just on the last topic as well, nobody had to train me how to use my iPad or my iPhone. No one taught me how to use a telephone in my house. Nobody came and trained me on how to use my television set. Those were all things that I intuitively picked up because I had a high degree of motivation to solve for them, and they enabled something I was trying to do, and they enabled it more efficiently. I can tell you my sales team struggles with putting information into Salesforce every day, and they wouldn't do it unless I mandated it, and part of that is because it doesn't help them, it helps me. So part of good technology and professional development is also taking a look at technology, not for technology's sake, but technology for enabling teaching and learning. And these teachers are a pretty good resource relative to telling you what they need.
I love that story. I can't help but tell. When I was starting the school 12 years ago, George Brackett, who was one of the co-founders, ran the technology and education program at Harvard for years. And, I was not the most tech-savvy person. It was a small school. We're starting, and I said, I don't really think we're going to have room for a computer lab. And so, what should we do? And he said, are you having a pencil lab? And that was a mind shift moment for me. I never went back after that. And he said the technology, so we were wireless from day one, and he said it should just be like when you need the pencil is there. That is all technology is. It's totally in service to teaching and learning. But I think it's easy to forget. Your question.
So just piggybacking on that comment, I'd like to ask a question, Melissa, which is, on average, how many periods per week does a typical middle school student in Boston sit in front of a computer? Because my experience in New York City is the answer in New York is very different, and I'd love to know what's the case in Boston on average per week in middle school.
I don't have that fact off the top of my head. So I'd like to switch it around a little bit because I don't think sitting in front of a computer is how we should measure things. It's about, where is the technology being brought into the classroom to help theirs. So I'll just frame it that way. When I frame it that way, I'll say not enough, and that it varies. I think one of the things that we struggle with, given our scale, and even, we're a little microcosm in comparison to New York, but, there's huge variance. And I don't want to say too much of the time, but it is those innovative teachers that they're the ones who are checking out the mobile carts and bringing them in and thinking about how they can really integrate that into whatever their lesson is for that day. So it's how do we work within the faculty and get and build that out, as Deb was saying, kind of where you start and then let it grow and grow. And on technology, there's kind of two fronts to it as well, because Craig was also mentioning, just to, my little STEM plug here, because there is also, the technology needs to be integrated. It is in service to teaching and learning, but it is also a curriculum and a content area as well. So we also want to be, the fastest growing job markets, are technology focused or technology, STEM focused. And so how are we doing in terms of having those hands-on project-based experiences? It goes back to the other point this gentleman made here in terms of shifting what's happening in the classroom. I think as we have more of a focus of those hands-on experiences, we're going to see that as an entry point as well for the technology to come in. So.
Okay, we've got one more question because they just told me I'm running out of time here.
So I run a small startup making interactive textbooks, and we spend a lot of time trying to make our technology as intuitive as possible. Just going back to what Craig said about the iPhone and the iPad being intuitive, the iPhone was actually one of the most brilliant marketing campaigns ever because it was not intuitive. It is not an intuitive device. You learn to do it from the commercials. And they would play you these 30-second commercials, and they would show you in the entire commercial, you'd press things, and you'd use the phone, and go back and forth, and they'd show you how to use the device. So we spend a lot of time making technology intuitive, and as we are starting to partner with schools, I'm wondering what's the typical commitment that you see from the various companies who are pushing their technologies. How much time are they spending teaching the teachers? What's the typical commitment over what time? You say that it's going to be in cycles, but what is the typical cycle? We don't want to get in the teacher's way at the same time as trying to be there to support them.
Well, I'm going to let Melissa answer that since you're playing in district.
Sure. So if I understand your question, it's how much time are the vendors or the tech companies spending?
Yeah.
I don't think there's a set answer. I mean, oftentimes we say, as little time as possible, focus on teaching of the technology. How can the technology help whatever is happening in the classroom? So in my mind, you don't want to be the focus on having to teach the tool. So there are other ways that you can do that. I mean, the perfect example of commercials, we try to do those commercials all the time. We do short little video clips, and we'll get those posted on our portal. So as people are logging into a portal, they're able to learn more about how to use systems that we have or tools that we have. So I don't know if that's answering your question. I mean, I think I will say what oftentimes can get a little frustrating, if you will, from my side is, ed tech folks are spending a lot of time in making the tools as intuitive as possible, but then they assume that there isn't that no training is needed.
Right.
So you can't go that far
Right.
to say nothing is like, oh, you can just get it up and going in a heartbeat. Okay, there are other things that you need to think about holistically. So what I like is when folks come in and we really map things out and we think about it from so where do we need to tie in with the school leadership or with the teachers? And then how do I make sure that my folks are familiar and trained and are aware of what's happening so that when we get the call, because the calls